Hi, in this video people are talking about Trump allowing white South Africans in America, who are granted asylum in the United States are provided with several benefits, including assistance with housing, essential items, and finding employment. The U.S. government, through the Department of Health and Human Services, offers help with basic needs like housing, groceries, clothing, and hygiene products. Additionally, South Africans are expected to find work and support themselves, with support offered in finding entry-level jobs, and the government might also pay for them at prepaid phone services. There's a lot going on in the world. Let me know in the comments what you think about it. Let's get into the clips.
The Trump administration is expected to receive the first group of white Afrikaner refugees in the U.S. tomorrow. In a statement, the U.S. State Department says the white Afrikaner refugees are victims of unjust racial discrimination. Meanwhile, South Africa's Department of International Relations and Cooperation has reiterated that the discrimination claims against white Afrikaners are unfounded. This group of white Afrikaners are at the O.R. Tambo International Airport, where they are expected to catch a commercial flight to the United States. They're expected to land at the Dallas International Airport in Washington tomorrow morning, local time in the U.S. South African government have dismissed unfounded allegations that the white Afrikaners are being targeted for persecution and discriminatory laws in South Africa. Last week, the South African Deputy Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Alvin Boertes, spoke to his U.S. counterpart on this matter. Pretoria was frank in refuting allegations that it's marginalizing the white Afrikaners in the country.
Especially with media from the United States like Jordan Peterson and I saw Ben Shapiro, who the apartheid government, had a close relationship with with the apartheid state of Israel. So that's just very coincidental. But yeah, I think it's a publicity stunt.
You think it has some sort of muscle, though? I think it does, because that's why Trump is bringing all these, these tariffs in Africa, yeah, based on that.
So yeah, well, I don't like that argument, because Trump imposed tariffs on every country around the world, not just on South Africa. So unless you have EFF radicals in China and in Vietnam, I don't see that argument working, because Trump imposed tariffs as a spite to the whole world. So Trump doesn't care about South Africa. He doesn't care about white people. He cares about creating the narrative that he does for political gain. And that's my view. I've never liked what Trump is doing, and I don't even think Trump could point to South Africa on a global map, or spell Afrikaans, or Boere.
White guilt is becoming useless, and not because the past doesn't matter, but because feeling bad has become a substitute for not doing good. Yes, poor white South Africans are tired of being told how privileged they are. And rightfully so. You can't feed your children on colonial shame. But here's the truth. Acknowledging a crime is not the same as accepting blame. The system was rigged. It favored whiteness. That is a fact, not a feeling. But of course, if your take is guilt and not cooperation, then you've missed the point entirely. Because today's black and white poor have more in common than the politicians keeping them there. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't a call for revenge. This is a call for repair. Black South Africans aren't asking for superiority, just equality.
We built apartheid, and now we're refugees. We took the land, we took people's futures, we took their dignity, and now we're being given refuge? What must it feel like to be a person of color, a black person in South Africa, watching my people who broke this country and now run off to claim victimhood somewhere else? We say we're afraid, but we built what we were afraid of. In 1994, we didn't give over power, we just gave over the mess and said, it's your fault, you deal with it now. But our white hands are clean. And now we're fleeing the country, crying reverse racism. So black South Africans, please tell the bad guy right here how it makes you feel. Because this is not right. This is sick. And I don't want to be the perpetrator anymore.
Racial persecution. In fact, the government there has vowed to take away their farmland that they own. And so the president has talked significantly about this. As for further details on refugee claims and asylum claims, I would defer you to the State Department.
Deeply and morally wrong-headed and repulsive. These are the descendants of the people who created the most diabolical system of white supremacy in human history, apartheid. They're not directly responsible for it, but it was a system that actually moved black people off of the arable land. So they inherited the land that the black people had to give up. It was called forced removal. It was something called the Bantustan policy, where they moved black people out of the cities and farmlands into these remote areas with non-arable land. I mean, it was just one of the most worst processes ever. But what has happened in this strange, bizarre world we're living in is that the Afrikaners have become the darling of these right-wing, white supremacist movements around the world. Trump amazingly called it a genocide, one of the worst lies I've ever heard him say. There's just been a small handful of farmers that have been killed over the past 10 years. No land has actually been expropriated.
Hello, Africans. I don't know whether to laugh or to cry, but something funny is happening. You see, sometimes nature will do the job for you. You don't need to struggle that hard. Sometimes nature will do the job for you. But why am I saying this? I'm saying this with relation to what is happening right now between the South Africans, the American government, and the black South Africans. You understand that there's a time when President Trump called out, not really called out, but called them. Called them is the right word. He called out Julius Malema, but called the white people and told them that you don't need to struggle in the United States, in the South African government or the country as a whole. You can come to US. US is where you belong. You're white like me. I welcome you. I'll give you a privileged refugee status. And so many of these white people, some of them were happy, some of them were saying, no, South Africa is our home country and we are going nowhere, right? And you know that in South Africa we have two kinds. I'm saying in larger quantities, we have two kinds of white people. We have the Afrikaners, which is it's a dialect of Dutch or Netherlands. It's a dialect of Dutch. So Afrikaners, not C, but K-double-A. So they are white people. They are not Africans. Afrikaners. I'm insisting for a reason. And then we have the British. The British came there as colonizers. So we have the British and the Afrikaners. Many parts of South Africa, the prime lands, have been taken by these Afrikaners or some of these British. So mostly the larger quantity, or rather the larger population, is the Afrikaners. The larger white population is the Afrikaners, and it has been, the movement has been going. The movement that Julius Malema has been passing, sing the farmer, sing the Boer. Sing the farmer, sing the Boer. You know the song and how it goes. So these white people are feeling threatened. For this reason, Trump called them in for them to come and have a stay at the United States of America. I myself, I say that it's okay. People should go back to where they came from. People should go back to their ancestral lands, because even African Americans are moving back to Africa. Why can't white people go back to where they really came from? That is my thought. So this whole agenda is having mixed reactions all over. Now I want us to listen to what people think, what the US government think, and what the South Africans think. I shall delve back where I shall also give you my deep critical analysis. Let's dive in.
Historically privileged equality feels like oppression. And until we admit that and work together, we're just trading chains for fences.
Can black and white South Africans ever be united if the land and the wealth is not shared? Political freedom in 1994 was not liberation. It was a deal, a compromise. Black South Africans got the vote, but white capital kept the bank, the land, and the mines. Today, 10% of the population own 90% of the wealth. We call it democracy, but the poor are still trapped in shacks, on poisoned land, and in broken schools. Most potent weapon in the hand of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. Steve Biko. Been taught that equality is chaos, that asking for the land is too much. Yet, Stellenbosch thrives while the Eastern Cape dies.
The suburbs are armed and the townships are hungry. That is not peace, that is a ceasefire. Ladies and gentlemen, until every South African has land, until every South African eats, until the domestic worker's child and the CEO's child get the same education, there is no unity and there is no nation. Talk about rainbow nation lies when the color still bleeds unequal.
The United States says it is the start of a larger relocation effort for white South Africans, which it claims are being persecuted because of their race. Now, the South African government has dismissed the U.S. government's allegations as completely false. And in other news developments, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has given a cautious response to Russian President Vladimir Putin's offer of direct peace talks.
I watch Word School Linen and I see a board with only white children. And obviously, reasonably, I ask, is this a school where there's only white children? And then I go onto the internet just to confirm, just to make sure. And I see Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C, Exhibit D. Here, there seems to be maybe 1, 2, 3 black children, colored children, but they seem like the minority. And in South Africa, black children and colored children are the majority. Exhibit C. So I'm not going to say anything. I'm just showing what exists on social media. I'm just curious if anybody has answers or anything interesting to say. I'd really love to hear.
You know how extreme your brand of racism has to be for other white people to be like, yo, buddy, you're going to have to bring it down a notch because you're doing too much. I'm Nantle, I'm South African, but I live in Germany. And a couple of years ago, I was doing a German language course and I met a Dutch guy. We get to talking and I tell him that I'm South African and he says, well, that's interesting. And I was like, what's interesting about that? Have you been to South Africa? And he says, no, I haven't, but I have met a couple of South Africans and I did not like a single one of them. So I say, well, that's weird. What's wrong with South Africans? Why don't you like them? And he says, oh, sorry, just to be clear, I've only ever met white South Africans and every single one of them has been misogynistic and racist. And this was coming from a Dutch guy. About 2 or 3 years ago, one of my German friends, white German to be specific, visited South Africa for the first time. So when he comes back, I'm like, so how was South Africa? What did you think of it? Like, how was your experience? And he was like, well, I like South Africa. I think it's very beautiful and generally the people are wonderful. But I was very shocked by the racism. And I'm like, racism? You're white. There's no way. What racism are you talking about? He's like, no, I didn't experience racism, of course, but there was so much racism and it was evident everywhere all the time. Well, he did spend most of his time in Cape Town and other parts of the Western Cape. And he goes on to tell me the story about how he was walking through a park with his wife and his son, and there was a black guy sitting on a bench, and as they approached, the black guy stood up for them, and he was so confused because he was like, why are you standing up for us? And the black guy was like, no, sir, you can sit. And he was like, that was so weird, Nantle. That was so uncomfortable. And you could tell that it is from the racism, the normalized racism in Cape Town.
Okay, let me stop that. You heard what she just said? She said this black South African saw these white folks and just got up out his seat to offer his seat to these white people. Do you really think an FBA would do some crap like that? Let these Afrikaners go pull up on the FBA sitting down and expect him to get up. I wish one of them say, you gonna get up? Like, what? Why don't you make me get up? How about that? Make me get up out of this seat. Boy, these Afrikaners better stay away from the FBAs. Ooh, they better stay away.
Now, just to be very clear, there is no competition for racism or racists. There isn't racism that is too much racism and racism that is like just enough, like just tolerable, or racists that are more preferable than other racists. However, whenever someone asks me about the racism in Germany, as a South African, a black South African who has lived in the United States, who lives in Germany and who travels the world. I have never met worse racists than whites. Asks me about the racism in Germany. As a South African, a black South African who has lived in the United States, who lives in Germany, and who travels the world, I have never met worse racists than white South Africans.
To the 50 Afrikaners who fled to the US, calling themselves refugees, you are not refugees. You are just a case study of white flight dressed up as martyrdom. You're not escaping violence, you're escaping equality. South Africa didn't chase you away. You ran. Yes, South Africa is one of the most violent countries in the world. Yes, brutality exists. But let's be honest, violence affects all communities, not just white farmers. Black, colored, Indian, and yes, white people are all targets of a national crime crisis. What we have is a breakdown in safety, not a white genocide. This is not ethnic cleansing, it's criminal collapse, and running to the US won't fix it. You are part of a 7% minority, but somehow still manages to control over 70% of the wealth. That is not persecution, that's privilege on a guilt trip. And let's be real, if we tried to relocate just half of the Afrikaans population, it would take decades, billions in logistics, and you'd still end up culturally homeless in a country that don't want your apartheid baggage. You're not brave, you're not victims. You're scared of a world where you don't get to be in charge, and that makes the rest of the Afrikaans community cringe, because you make us look weak. South Africa is broken, and it's our problem to solve. So if you don't have the spine to do so, stay gone.
They only want white people here. Because when we think about refugees who need immediate resettlement, expedited screenings, we usually think about people who are fleeing extreme violence, persecution, famine, war in places like South Sudan, Myanmar, the Congo, not white Afrikaners. See that chartered plane the Trump administration is sending? It's not going to collect refugees that have been sitting in resettlement camps for years, fully vetted, waiting to come to the United States to escape violence. No, it's going to South Africa to collect white people who claim they're being discriminated against. Why would they be getting discriminated against? Probably because they spent generations instituting legalized forms of racial segregation and discrimination called apartheid, aka Stephen Miller's wet dream. See, while the rest of the world after World War II saw that maybe racial discrimination not such a hot idea and favored more policies of integration and away from colonization, Afrikaners doubled down on that shit and instituted apartheid. Although it ended over 30 years ago, the social and economic legacies of apartheid continue today. South Africa is the most unequal country in the entire world, according to the World Bank, with white South Africans earning over 12 times what black South Africans do. But don't worry, we're going to make sure that the white Afrikaners who instituted generations of discrimination and segregation against black people get everything they need to get started here in the United States in their new life.
Donald Trump is chartering a plane using U.S. taxpayer money to bring refugees from South Africa to America. Now let's think about this for just one moment. What is the same about all these South African refugees that we might notice? They're all white people. That's right. And so when we talk about deporting people, it appears that they're mostly non-white. But we can bring in South Africans who are white. And I just can't shake this feeling. I just can't shake this feeling that maybe, and I'm not saying it, I don't know. I'm not there. I'm not in the room when these conversations occur. It seems to me that it's possible that these guys in the White House are motivated by certain aspects of these people that they're bringing in and taking out. I'm not saying it's true.
When Donald Trump sends in white South Africans, he's not sending us their best, all right? He's sending us their failures, he's sending us their crybabies, and some, I assume, are really good people.
Sending private planes to pick up 8,000 Caucasian South African refugees when we're kicking people out that are in the middle of their immigration proceedings here in the U.S. now. Literally having people show up for their final steps of their immigration process and having them arrested, detained, and deported. Doesn't make any sense to me unless
Gone.
To all of the South African Afrikaans refugees that are coming to America soon, I just want to let you know, as someone whose wife is Afrikaans, who's been to South Africa multiple times, you're going to have a bad time. There's no white genocide happening in South Africa. You have crime that's happening as a result of racism-fueled generational economic inequality, the same thing that's happening in America. We're just a couple decades ahead of you on the unchecked capitalism timeline. But I have good news for you. You don't have to worry about the cheap exploited labor rising up against you anymore, because now that you're in America, you'll get to be the cheap exploited labor. If you were middle class or upper middle class in South Africa and you come to America, you're poor now. Like, really poor. You're not going to have maids and gardeners and personal servants that you can pay $15 a day for. Now you get to be the cheap labor. But by all means, please come to America and experience the American capitalism that Elon Musk's been raving about to you. You'll probably love it. You know, what do I know? There's probably very little chance that you'll end up going back to South Africa in a year or two after realizing how overpriced and fucked up America is. I wouldn't even worry about that as a possibility. And if you think I'm being mean to these people because I think they're a bunch of racist, bigoted colonizers who wish they could go back to apartheid South Africa, it's just...
After seeing what some people had to say, I don't know how I feel about South Africans in America. One girl said her experience with some white Africans were the worst type of racism she's encountered. She also said the racism is really bad in South Africa. A dark-skinned person got up and asked if the white people visiting wanted to sit there to avoid any altercations. That's crazy. Africans had to go through apartheid France, and American governments take their resources and leave them with nothing. White South Africans know the history and what's going on, and they still choose division. Recently, I've seen white South Africans with signs up outside in Africa where majority of people are darker skinned saying whites only. So I don't know how this will play out, and black Americans and even some white Americans and other races aren't going to allow the old racist tactics like the white only sign. Boo. Should I also heard Africans aren't genociding white South Africans like Trump claims. It's a false narrative. White South Africans aren't being allowed to be openly racist and divisive without consequences. Like, subscribe, and let me know what you think down below. Thanks for watching.